That sounded a little weird. Anyways, what we are working on tonight is a bonus cartoon from what's going to be the first Noah, or not Noah. Why do I keep calling Zamo Noah and Noah Zamo? The first Zamo comic collection. This is Zamo the Destroyer. We've been working on a reboot that never ended up happening from a couple, more than a couple years ago, from 2013. But for the last few shows, we've been inking that, and now we're going to go to what will be the coda of that book, which I'm hoping I'll have out in the fall. And that is a little update on Zamo. Because I ended up not rebooting the comic at that time. Instead, a few months or probably closer to a year later, I started doing the Zamo the Destroyer show, which was a comedy podcast, uh, ostensibly narrated by Zamo and for Zamo's friends and family back home in the jungle in Colombia. Which, us humans were not supposed to be listening to that. It was for iguanas only. Um, Anyways, I did over 200 episodes of that podcast, and I have all these scripts. Well, I have almost all the scripts. I think there's two of the very first month's worth of shows that I cannot locate. So I may have to listen to those and transcribe them or whatever. But I have hundreds of scripts, and I was actually looking at some of them this afternoon, and holy crap. I think they're hilarious and kind of edgy. More edgy than what I do on the Zamo the Destroyer show for what did I just say? I keep getting Zamo. I don't know why my brain wants to say Noah for Zamo and Zamo for Noah, but I was referring to Noah's Archipelago, my I guess current web comic, although it's going to be, it will be becoming a graphic novel project soon rather than the twice weekly web comics. But anyways, I've got a whole bunch of scripts, so we're gonna work in the next couple 3 or 4 months on Wednesday streams to finish up some bonus cartoons and whatnot for the Zamo first Zamo book, and then we will pivot into doing illustrations for those Zamo podcast scripts, and those will be further books. I have no idea how many books it'll end up being, but probably at least 3, probably 4 or 5, who knows. So here we have our little coda where Zamo is going to be doing a little talk radio sort of thing, the Zamo News Network. And this will end up being like, I guess not really the last comic in the book because I'll have like a self-portrait on the about the author page and that kind of crap, right? But it'd be the last proper comic in the Zamo the Destroyer comics collection. And then I expect this page isn't going to take me that long to do. I've got a second page where it'll be a couple illustrations for, I'm going to have like a meet the cast kind of thing, listing the main characters. And so we will work on that page at the back of tonight's stream. And hello, cousin Rocco. How's it going? Let me just make the chat bigger so I can read it easily off my laptop. And hello, Nuhubaid. I hope I said that right. Welcome to tonight's stream. Now, this comic project was originally, good. I'm glad. I'm always kind of worried because sometimes my guesses on people's name pronunciation are really off. So I'm always glad when I guess right. My day is going pretty well. I hope yours is going well as well. I'm glad to hear you're doing good. Um, so this comic was a web comic that I did back in actually the MySpace days, like a long time ago before I turned it into a podcast. And I had actually somewhere in the midst of doing um, the Zamo the Destroyer comic, actually took like a night school class for book design, and I did like a mock-up of a Zamo um, comic treasury anthology sort of a book in that and planned some different bonus material. So I think I maybe flip through that on an earlier stream or whatnot, but gonna kind of have another look at it and see whether I want to reuse any of that bonus material or I'll just do new stuff. Nice, it's cool. Oh, thank you. Uh, so the premise of Zamo the Destroyer is this iguana character who we will be inking today ended up coming to Canada, planning to go to Los Angeles, but uh, the pet store trade didn't quite obey. Hello, Michelle. Welcome to the show. Hello. Um, so then it's kind of the whole basis of the comic is Zamo's life in Canada, complaining about pet humans and all this sort of stuff. And Zamo's a talking iguana, kind of trying to take over the neighborhood and all the craziness that goes with that. Kind of, I guess, well, you could say fish out of water, although kind of iguana out of the jungle, either way. Loosely based on, well, obviously not the talking bit, but uh, kind of inspired by, I guess would be the more accurate way to put it, by an iguana that I had for like 10 years. Hey, Manuel. No worries. Catch you again next time. Thanks for stopping by. Um, so this iguana from 1994 until 2004. Um, and she kind of ended up becoming kind of the central character in our family. So that kind of ended up inspiring this comic. Um, and I mean, there are other things. For a little while in the 90s, I was an anthropologist. I'm from Malaysia. That's why my name is like this. Oh, cool. It's always interesting to see different people's names from different places. You know, I'm just often terrible at pronouncing them. That's why I'm like, oh, I hope I said that right. Uh, Meanwhile, I'm somebody where like my name's Pira, but if people call me Pyra, like I'm not bothered by that at all. But I know a lot of people are like, get it right. It's like I try to. That's so one of the other things that kind of inspired um, the Zama world was in the 90s. I was an anthropology major. Didn't actually do anything with it, but some stuff kind of ended up inspiring the comic, like the whole thing about field work where you're supposed to sit in the corner and take notes. And in theory, the people who know that you're there are supposed to act naturally and not and totally not change their behavior because they know they're being observed. And anyways, so we used to joke that the iguana that I had was an anthropologist because she would sit there and like stare at us, but not want to get involved with us, even if her cage door was open and all that. So, all that kind of ended up inspiring um, the comic in the Zama world as well. Although iguanas also tend to be fairly lazy critters, they sleep a lot. So, one of the other ongoing jokes in the comic was that Zamo is rarely seen actually doing any anthropology. field work or study because Zamo's lazy and just naps all the time, but, uh, certainly claims to be a postdoctoral anthropology student from the Iguanid University of the Jungle in Colombia, which is apparently a very prestigious university. There's a whole thing with the world building back there, so a lot of which I guess some of that we'll see more when I get into illustrations for the podcast scripts that I'm gonna turn into short illustrated short stories. Um, because of course, the original comics, well, they're already drawn, and there is a website for Zamo the Destroyer, and definitely it desperately needs to be rebuilt, so a pet named Coconut. Do you have pets? Right now, I don't. I have thought about it, but, my house is a little bit over full with random stuff. So there's space issues, um, and yeah, cats are fun, they're gorgeous. There's actually several cats in my neighborhood. I don't think they're feral, I think it's just, people let their cats outside and they, like, hang out in my backyard and, um, sometimes fight for territory in the backyard. So, part of me is like, "Well, if I did get a cat and wanted to, let him or her out in the backyard, might get beaten up by the cats who've already claimed that as their territory." Um, Thought about getting a dog a few times too, but, kinda right now, I don't know if I'd have time to really dedicate to taking care of them. So it's kind of like, "Yeah, for right now, no pets, but at some point in the future, it'd be nice." Um, I mean, over the course of my life, I've had a cat when I was a kid, had a dog when I was a kid, had the iguana for, like, 10 years. Also used to have budgies, fish tanks, although, I mean, I guess you could think of them as pets, but not really pets that you interact with, really. I think that's kind of it, but, yeah, it'd be nice. And I did actually when I got my, house, I actually did have finish off the fence was partial or the backyard was partially fenced, so I did finish off the fence thinking that I was going to get a dog, and I just have been too busy to actually get a dog. So but one of these days, at least the fence is already done, so it's, I've thought a couple times even of getting an iguana again, although I think the rules, have changed with exotic pets, where I live. I'm in, British Columbia in Canada. I think you maybe still can get iguanas, but I think the rules some municipalities you're not allowed at all, which honestly, that's probably for the best because, I mean, my iguana, she lived for 10 years. The reason what ended up, happening to her is one day she decided she was gonna jump across the laundry room, and she kinda smacked her tail on the tile floor, and, then she ended up I guess she broke some blood vessels, and she got, sepsis in the tail, so, a month later, that was the end of her. But other up until that point, she'd been very, very healthy. So she may have, otherwise lived, quite a long time. I had a cousin who had an iguana, and his iguana lived to be 27. Oh, yeah, so they do live a long time. The only thing is where I'm at, you know, we have a lot of windstorms, but we don't have buried power lines, but we do have big trees. So it's pretty common in the winter to get power outages. They're not necessarily long, but you don't know if it's gonna be out for an hour or if it's gonna be out overnight and stuff like that. And, so in terms of an animal like an iguana that needs, basking lights and heating pads and all this sort of stuff, like, that would be a concern with me that if I couldn't guarantee, um, heating always being there and whatnot in the winter, like, wouldn't wanna take that risk, right? Um, Whereas when I had an iguana before, I lived in Vancouver, which, I mean, yeah, sure, every so often you would have power outages, but wasn't like a something that always happened, right? And because yeah. Yeah, I have heard about, that there's a thing with dogs that way, yeah. Um, I mean, cats are great, but I do love cats. Most recent cat well, wasn't my cat, it was my brother's cat, but I, took care of him for a couple months, when my brother was in the process of moving, from town to town, but, that cat was really sweet, loved him. So and one of these days, I may end up getting a cat too. Um, Kinda would depend where if I was still living here or if I moved or whatnot. Brother hates cats. Yeah, some people do, some people don't. Like, for example, my dad likes animals in theory, but he kind of really does not like having animals in his house. So it's actually kind of unfortunate. I think actually if my dad got either a cat or a dog, but, some sort of pet to be interacting with all the time, I think that would probably be great for my dad, but he does not want the responsibility, even though he has the time and whatnot, but he just doesn't wanna deal with the hassle. Um, and my brother actually where he lives now, his city you can have cats and all that, of course, but they have some rules where you're not allowed to let the cat outside, and we grew up with cats that were kinda always indoor, outdoor, that you would let your cat out to roam, and he'd come back to get fed and, that sort of stuff. Um, and I agree with that's my attitude too, let the animal if the animal is one that can roam, let them obviously have them spayed, neutered, etcetera, but, microchipped, but, where he lives now, they're not allowed at all to ever let a cat outside, and, bylaw enforcement is pretty on top of that, so it kinda sucks, in that sense, if you have a really big house, I guess, but I do think cats kinda do like going outside. Um Here, of course here it's more laid back, people like, at least in terms of bylaws and whatnot, you are allowed to let your cat out, even though it's kind of frowned on, but, my thing is just not really having time to dedicate to an animal at the moment, so all my animals are cartoon animals, I guess. Uh, it's always a little weird drawing Zamo from the front because Zamo's got what they call a dewlap, this little flap under the jowl. Um, it kinda looks a little weird from the front. It's what, iguanas use sort of for aggression displays and stuff like that, but also they use it for basking. They'll extend it out, um, and kinda stand sideways to the sun. Um, I guess before I go too much further, I should deal with this little, wire thing. Uh, Not all, headphones have the, curly, wire, but I used to do, years ago, I used to do college radio, and it seemed that the studio headphones always had, um but they also often had the cord get kinda messed up like this, where it would start going coiling the backwards or whatever too. It's cool, I only draw anime hands. Oh, cool. Yeah, animes I've seen so much anime art that looks cool, but I will admit I do not know the first thing about anime, um, in terms of, shows and whatnot, so I kinda grew up with more, newspaper comics is kinda my main influence. My brother was into, Superman, Batman, Punisher, those kinda comic books. I was more into the newspaper funnies, so those are kinda my points of reference, but definitely, heard lots of people. I sound like such a, boomer or whatever. I've heard lots of people talking about, "Oh, this anime and that anime," and them being awesome, but just haven't had time to get into it. I kinda wouldn't know where to start either, but the art does look really cool. Right, so we got our weird little mucked up, um, cable on the headphones. Yeah, let's kind of draw in a little. My usual style is I try and do as much of the drawing with this finer nib initially, and then I'll go in with a fatter nib to thicken up lines and put in shadows and whatnot. Excuse me. I'm also trying to kind of stick with the general style of Zamo. So I wouldn't normally in Zamo put like shadow or shading on Zamo. It was kind of like a outline. So it's just uh, kind of similar to the style I use in my uh, current comic projects, but although, well, actually, I guess because I'm um, re-releasing Zamo books and I am doing bonus cartoons for it, I guess Zamo is back to being a current comic project, but yeah, is my favorite color. Um, Kind of depends on the day. I think probably like turquoise. I have a lot of turquoise in my house, but I like purples. I like hot pink, magenta. Also depends on the application. Like I do really like really vivid, say orange shades, even like that kind of like crazy bright orange. But I would not have a room in my house that color because it would be too aggravating. Yeah, sometimes if you've got the wrong color on your walls, it kind of mucks you up. And I wouldn't wear that, but I like looking at that shade, that kind of bright. So a lot of obnoxious, super bright colors. Now, for this kind of art project, of course, it stays in black and white, but some of that's also, I mean, it's a little bit about simplicity of line work and whatnot. Some of it's also just straight up about printing costs because it's so much more expensive to print in color that it kind of becomes cost prohibitive. Gonna do this for the radio mic. Um, One of my other comic projects that I usually work on Tuesdays and Thursdays on stream is Noah's Archipelago, and that one mostly has been in full color, and it's a lot of like really vibrant um, pastels, jewel tones, that sort of a vibe, tropical kind of colors. So, or I guess I should say the sort of colors that are stereotypically considered tropical in North America. Mm. Well, the kind of microphones are very common in radio. What is it called? It's not Electrovox. I'm forgetting the brand name, so never mind. But um, I want to say the model number is R20, but now I can't remember what the brand is called. Although when I did college radio, we did not have this kind of mic this way. We had one that was kind of be like that. The capsule on the mic was um, that way, and then the mount kind of like they always have these kind of crazy elastic mounts and that so that they're called shock mounts so that they don't transmit thumps into the microphone. But anyways, the mic we used at CITR in Vancouver would sit upright and usually didn't have a fuzzy stock thing over the top of it. But minor details that don't really matter. And then I, of course, now put wet ink where I gotta remember to not stick my finger into it. The reference photo I used for this particular mic was a little unclear as to how the thing actually connects to the microphone, but there were kind of elastic ties. I think they actually it connects back there, so never mind. Somewhere in my hard drives, I actually have photos of the DJ booth at CITR Radio in Vancouver. But did I go look those up for reference? No, of course not. Working for memory. I love my sister. I don't know the details. His age, yeah. Well, and also, I mean, sometimes it's like it doesn't occur to you until later that, hey, I actually don't know that detail about so and about whichever relative, you know. And presuming that your brother's older, well, you weren't around yet when he was born, so you don't remember that to figure out, okay, he was born in such and such a year. So some families don't get hung up on the ages so much too. So oh, your sister's older. Okay. Little elastic. This nib is fighting me already. Well, mind you, I guess I've been drawing for about half an hour, but usually this nib starts fighting with me and kind of drying up about 45 minutes in. So it's doing it a little early today, but oh well. Yeah, it's gonna look like a weird basketball hoop kind of thing unless you're used to dealing with microphones. But and then if you're used to dealing with microphones, then you can probably tell where I've made the drawing inaccurate. But oh well. Yeah, alright, and then we want the cable to go up and put a little bit of shading on it there. Now we are going to bring that down. Zamo's got her elbow on the mute button, but show the little claws. She's a big girl. Yeah, well, especially once if you're taller than her. I think it's kind of common. Brothers kind of see their sisters that way too, for sure. I mean, I've only got one brother, and he's old, like, quite a bit older than me, and a lot taller than me. So it would certainly make sense if he viewed me as the little sister for multiple reasons. But since there, could continue that. I think I'm just gonna shade in here rather than have the floor kind of continue on because that's gonna confuse the microphone mount. Is that an iguana? Yes, it is. An obnoxious talking iguana well, at least in this drawing, has her own podcast complaining about the pet humans. The drawing is for a book I'm working on, which will be a collection of the comics I did with, the character's name is Zamo. This is actually my first web comic that I did starting actually 20 years ago now. But I never put together like a comic collection book. So that's my project for one of my projects this year. And there's a point where I was going to reboot the comic in 2013, and I had done like an 8-page reintroduction, which I've been inking on the Wednesday night streams up the last few weeks. And then I guess completely forgot about it. Never did it. So this drawing is then going to be explaining to anyone who sees the book that there are no more comics per se, but there will be books because when I went and did it as a podcast, I have all those scripts. So I'm going to turn them into short stories. And I'll do a couple illustrations for each short story. So, it kind of, I guess, be half comic, half short story collection. So this kind of sets that up at the very end of the book of all the comics. So and the premise for the podcast was that Zamo was making it to provide all the friends and family back home in South America with the latest gossip without having to like type that out on Facebook dozens of times for all the huge number of relatives. So this little audio board is one I'm kind of drawing from memory loosely based on the one when I used to have a college radio show, the one we used to use at CITR radio. Although I did not bother to look at reference photos. But I think we just on that board, I think the buttons at the bottom, we just had one. So if the button was pressed, that channel was live. Whereas if you're doing like audio recording in a recording studio, usually there'll be um, a mute button and a solo button, and all it gets a lot more complicated. But the radio board was a lot more straightforward. Um, it does have like the little faders and whatnot. Mm. Thanks. Yeah, I over the years, I kind of meant to go like, I need to do stuff with Zamo again, and then I just didn't have the time and whatnot, and then it's kind of I think it was about a month or so ago, I was thinking like, I never did do a Zamo book. And I'm working on a book with one of my other comics, Noah's Archipelago. So I will look through, I've got, these aren't the Zamo books, but books like the Profolio, and I have like 6 of them for Zamo, just packed out with comics. So I was flipping through that stuff and it kind of got me fired up about the comic again. I've got so much material I can basically just work from what I've already done and, making new illustrations such as this one. But and at some point, who knows, I may write new stories with Samo as well. But for right now, I just want to do something with the stories I already have so that they're not just kind of languishing on my hard drive doing nothing. Um, so yeah. Uh, so I'm gonna finish the lettering and I'm gonna put in shading with a fatter nib. And it's a fairly simplified drawing, and certainly compared to what I was doing on Monday's stream with Miles the half mouse, half rat dude going scuba diving and what felt like a million little anemones and teeny tiny fishes and all that. But the comics were always pretty simple, bold, clear kind of line work. So it does fit. What I'll have to do is with the bolder line, bolder pen will fill that in. Kind of lettered it a little bit weird down here, but oh well. Boards. Talk to an AI, but yeah. Well, that's the fun thing with pets is they usually listen to you. Although if you have an iguana, the iguana would look at me and stare at me for about a minute to a minute, sometimes up to 5 minutes, and then at some point she'd just yawn and walk away, which is kind of funny. I think she understood a few of our, human words. So I think she's kind of paying attention long enough to go like, "Okay, are you saying orange? Are you saying banana? Are you saying grape? Are you saying treat?" Like, and then when she decided that I was just, blathering and not, about to give her any, goodies, then she'd just be like, "Okay, I'm done with you." Just kind of the fun thing with animals that, sometimes, especially the more, like, independently minded ones, it's kinda like, what you see is what you get. People just, "Okay, I'm done with you, whatever." Or come up, whatever. Sometimes be friendly, sometimes not. I mean, cats are certainly a lot more cuddly than iguanas, although the iguana would come and cuddle sometimes. Usually when she was cold and wanted to borrow body heat. I would be like, "Oh, look, there's the human. I will use the human as a heating pad. Oh, now I'm warm enough. Okay, I'm gonna go back to trying to climb the mantelpiece or go sun myself in the window or whatever. Watch TV. She used to like watching cartoons. Also used to eat the houseplants. You know, sure too. From an iguana's perspective, it's like, well, that's what they're for, right? Plants are for eating. Humans who don't eat the plants in their house are just plain stupid. Some stuff like the graphic novel I'm working on right now for Ricky B. Rat, um, well, not all, but 95% of the lettering is actually done with, like, fine liner pens. Um, uh, Even though my writing's kind of basically the same, it has such a different vibe than, doing it with the dip pen. So it's kinda nice to, do the lettering this way. This gives it a bit of a different feel. And the line's more unpredictable, so, like, the E there, uh, make sure that's in the corner. The E there is kind of fat and a little bit splatted out because more of the liquid ink came out, whereas here it's a little thinner, more controlled, and I do kinda like that imperfection kinda look. I know a lot of people like using fonts, even if it's, like, a font that they make from their handwriting, and that's awesome too, but it is a different vibe, right? So, and also just the flexibility in the nib or the lack thereof tends to kind of force some different, I guess you could say, design decisions, typography decisions, although it's not type if it's hand drawn. So, but it also doesn't feel like calligraphy because it's messier. But, anyways, now we're going to put in some shadows in behind to make Zomo really pop out. Um, I do want to show, let me go dig it up. I don't have a lot of the older Zamos on hand because they're in the other room, but just as an example, I will show a couple of old Zamos. Let me just lift that out of the way so I don't smudge it for a moment. But like that's from 2007. So you can see the very kind of open drawing, just the outlines. And what we didn't see in the angle I had there is, the armpit stripe that all the iguanas have or the striped tail, but it's there. And then this was another one I did. Kinda like how the shadow is, very kind of spaced out line work. And this is the pet human Georgie who's got the flu and all that sort of stuff. So, we'll still be doing this kind of, a drawing there. Although I have, if I show the ones that I inked in the last couple months on the reboot that wasn't a reboot when it was drawn, but um, you can see also where I have Zamo drawn in a kind of very simple manner, but the background has more details or whatnot. Um, Especially something like that with like the park across the street. It's fairly detailed. Zamo's still drawn in a fairly simple manner. Um, or human characters, all that sort of stuff. It definitely did vary over the course of a few years. Like that this was, done a couple weeks ago, but that kind of heavy detail and line work, there are some Zamo comics, especially from, like, 2008, 2009, that are like that, but then Zamo is still very, you know, very kind of, I don't wanna say plain, but, simplified. Which also some of the idea there would be Zamo is, you know, lime green, so on a black and white scale, Zamo is going to be a lot closer to white, right? Um, I could, of course, put some shading and form in. Oops, I just put my hand down on the wet lettering, but that's okay, it didn't smudge. But because everything else in the book is not gonna be like that, then we kinda wanna have the consistency with the style that I had in those original comics. So, anyways, that's kind of neither here nor there. I want to put some dark shading in here as if there's a light coming from this side on Zamo. So I'll leave a little bit of a, well, actually, because Zamo is left pale. Mostly, I've gotta bring the darkness right up to the line, but some areas, like around the hands, I'll give a little bit of breathing room because Zamo's claws, for example, are fairly dark, so we don't wanna make them disappear. YouTuber, I love watching VTubers. Yeah, VTubers, that's when, somebody has, like, a kinda like a cartoon puppet sort of thing, right? I've seen some examples of it, I still haven't quite figured out exactly how they managed to do that. Well, I did hear, was it, Adobe, I think, has a character animator thing that you can do that with. Um, Not something I know a whole lot about, but it does seem like fun. Like, it would be something that would be fun to try and set up at some point. Um, at some point, what I'll probably I mostly stream vertically on my phone because it seems that that's what YouTube likes. But I do occasionally do streams where it's, the horizontal, kind of way, and when I do it that way, lately I've started using OBS. I think there is a way to set up OBS for vertical streaming where I could flip between multiple cameras and have everything kind of the same as the other streams, only vertical. I just haven't gotten around to playing with it enough to, know what the hell I'm doing. What's the, tech term? Sandboxing. I'd have to sandbox it and do some trial runs with that. I have to flip Zamo upside down just because then I can reach this corner easier. Yeah. All right, and then here we're just gonna kind of have some shading at the back. Yeah, these boards normally will be black, so fill that in kind of basically opaque black, but with some little like white halos around the faders, because then that preserves the details. I'm gonna make the desk kind of they always seem to be some sort of like a a grayish kind of thing, so we'll kind of just give a little bit of tone to it. And then fatten up that shadow of the floor so it shows so it brings things up, right? Well, welcome back, cousin Rocco, or cousin Rocco, whichever way it's supposed to be. Now, this drawing, I haven't decided yet. What does Japan say? T, like this T. Where is the A? Oh, I'm not sure what the actual Japanese. I thought the Japanese word for tea was matcha, but maybe that's just a type of tea. I'm not sure. In terms of English, well, English pronunciation and spelling is anybody's guess. It may be that at some point in the past, we used to say it like Tia or I don't know, something like that. We have a lot of dumb spelling rules in modern English, some of which probably used to make sense back in the day, but then pronunciation has changed over the years and now they make 0 sense, but we kept it the same way. Actually, probably should have had another channel right in here and drawn the buttons a little smaller, but oh well. And then we're assuming that there's a little part that sticks up on the board like this that has like the meters. So this is going to be like the top of that. Not that it's gonna, not that matters that much if it makes sense or not, but that is what it is. And just kind of scribble down there to block that in. And that'll probably end up being kind of cropped when it's scanned. Cool. So we've got one more page to do, but I'll also point out I use a blue underdrawing, which is quote unquote a non-photo blue. The one I use these days is Prismacolor 919. The idea with that is it's light enough that when you scan in black and white, it disappears, so you only have the actual line work. Um, Just kind of mention that preemptively because sometimes people will ask what the blue is. So that's that. We are now going to go and start doing a couple more character drawings, another page. And this is going to be for the kind of meet the cast part of the book. Um, so we're going to have a portrait of Zamo looking particularly fat. Like that's a belly full of bananas, probably. Sometimes I draw Zamo a little taller than that, but Zamo's usually kind of short and squat. And then Zamo's pet human, Georgie. So we will go back to the skinnier nib for this drawing. And then next week's show, we'll probably just have like four, I'll probably prep like 3 pages, so 6 of these sort of half-page drawings, and see how many of them we get through. Um, if memory serves, the main characters in the original Zamo comic, we had Zamo, we had Georgie, we had Georgie's boyfriend Wilhelm, Georgie's mom, Georgie's dad, Georgie's brother. Um, we had the neighbors. Probably would mostly draw the wife of the neighbor family, Mrs. Churchman, who kind of had a she and Zamo didn't get along. And then there's Georgie's friends, Chucky and Dina, who are commonly in the comic as well. So you're just gonna, over the next few weeks, kind of do a bunch of those sorts of bonus cartoons. Um, on here we've got Zamo's dewlap. Sometimes they have little teeny spikes down the front. And then of course, iguanas have like a tympanic membrane, so their ear is flat against their head. It doesn't stick out. It looks like a little oval. And carry on. And then they've got this sort of spiky crest. Um, I was just thinking I drew Zamo, but I didn't really draw much background, but especially because this one, Georgie has a background. So we might probably should add a background to Zamo's, which I should have planned ahead and added in. Um, but we may have to draw it upside down so that I don't smudge the line I already did. This is what happens when I only half plan. At some point, when you go down an iguana's tail, they'll still have some small little, not spikes like they have down the center of the back of the body, but they'll have like a little bit of a ridge. Um, Eventually gets a lot smaller and flatter, but is pretty much the whole length of the tail. And the tail, the iguana I had, um, she, when she was in like the last year of her life or so, she was what they call snout vent length. So tip of the tail to right at the base, or tip of the nose to the base of the tail. That was, I want to say 20 inches or 21 inches. And then her tail was about 4 feet. So she was a big girl. She sat on the back of, the sofa. She would take up, 2/3 of the length of the back of the sofa, and then she'd get mad if you sat at the far end where her tail was. Sometimes she was fine, but some days she was territorial, like, "No, I need the entire sofa to myself. You go sit on the floor." Um, and the male iguanas would be even bigger than that, full-grown adult male. They can be 7, I've even heard of 8 feet long from tip of the nose to tip of the tail. They get big. So, um, the Zamo as portrayed in the comic was, she was a big girl, but not as huge as, um, Also, of course, because it's the cartoon world, then Zamo goes around on her back legs. Um, has the really long toes with the claws on the end. One of them is kind of, well, I'll have one like that, and then when I scan, I'll just kind of like erase the Georgie part out and vice versa. That's- the claws are very, very sharp. Um, I don't know how well, that might actually show that scar. I have a bunch of scars on my arms and whatnot that are from the iguana, but that is one that I had from my iguana. We got in a few disagreements about things like whether or not it was bath time or whether or not she was allowed to climb on the mantelpiece and kick things off of it. So, of course, the actual iguana, this would be like a chocolate brown and then a tan. But for the purposes of a black and white cartoon, we just do black bands. Although I think it does depend where an iguana is from because I've seen some where it definitely looked like their tail stripes were pretty much black, um, black versus brown. So it's like Peruvian iguanas tend to have a bit more of a greenish hue to their skin, or a bluish hue to their green skin, and other iguanas be a little more of a brownish green and whatnot. So um, I get all sorts of those sorts of details. But of course, what I forgot about was the background, and because I don't want to smudge that, I'm going to flip this upside down. And actually, I am going to bring up my iPhotos because I was actually in my garden earlier today. Oh, sister be like ABCDGC. That's always fun with kids where they're like, I'm just making up the spelling rules as I go along. Um, so what I've got in one window, which isn't, of course, going to show, is I took a bunch of photos of flowers from my garden today. So I'm going to use them as reference to just kind of pull something on my butt for flowers. Iguanas do like eating flowers, which is annoying if you have, say, a hibiscus plant inside your living room and you would like the flowers to not be eaten. They will be eaten. They 100% will be if you have an iguana. Heard, I mean, they've become an invasive species in Florida. And, but even aside from that, I've definitely heard of people where if they've got a vacation property in Florida or, um, in the Caribbean or whatnot, the iguanas come and like eat their flowers, eat the flowers off their shrubs and stuff like that. And people get really mad. But, that's what iguanas do. They eat flowers. And I mean, it's not just iguanas, of course. You know, I live on Vancouver Island in Western Canada, and, my house is fine. I live in a town, but my dad, any flowers he has in his garden, the deer come and eat them. So, you know, it's not like, iguanas are the only herbivores out there, devouring gardens. What I'm kind of trying to draw here is, a camellia. I don't know if iguanas would eat camellias, or if they'd be toxic or whatever, but it also kinda looks like a rose, so close enough. I don't think I have any, roses in bloom yet. There will be in about a week and a half. I'd probably have roses in bloom already, except I was late in doing my spring pruning, so I set them back a little bit this year, but it's fine. And then there's other, petals, but that kinda gives the idea. So now I'll go flip it the other way, and we'll try and add a little bit of shadow. And this kinda works because Zamo's eyeballing it like, "Hmm, lunch." My cousin who had, a big male iguana that lived to be 27, his sister also had an iguana. They got them at the same time, in the '90s. The sister's iguana did not live as long. I think she lived to be about 10 or so, and then, um, she got, I think they call it egg bound, and I think they had a surgery to remove the eggs 'cause she wasn't able to lay them, but I don't know that she recovered very well from the surgery. Um, so anyways, unfortunately, Georgette did not, survive super long, anyways, for a while, my cousin and Georgette the iguana lived at my aunt's place. My aunt always had her whole backyard was like what they used to call a victory garden. So loads and loads of veggies and whatnot. And Georgette would just kind of let her, they would open the back door. Georgette would go wander out, go down, eat a bunch of like zucchini leaves and stuff, and just kind of graze on whatever she wanted from the garden. And then when she was done, she would sun herself on the patio and then head back in. Um, I think I'm just going to leave it with the one flower. Um, and then we'll pretend it's a rose. So I'll draw as opposed to a camellia. So we will kind of add some of the sepals here. So then the stem would be coming out there. That would kind of that kind of a vibe. And go from there. Why is it funny? Uh, why are people putting laugh reacts? Who knows? um, it's kind of funny to think about, different animals and their antics and whatnot. I'll tell you one story about my iguana, and eating houseplants and stuff like that. She was obsessed with, hibiscuses, so and my mom had gotten some, potted hibiscus. How much to eat. Well, this one, eats a ton in the comics. My actual iguana, she had a fat belly, but she was also longer, so she kind of was shaped a little bit more like, take this random. My actual iguana was kinda shaped a little bit more kind of I wouldn't go so far as to say torpedo, but kinda like that, and then if this was, like, the top-down view, these would be the spines on her crest, uh, legs kinda like that and whatnot. Um, iguanas, I think, tend to, not, overeat as much as some other animals, like, cats can get obese, right? And dogs definitely can, obviously we can. But I remember at times, so this would be if this was, top-down view, eyeballs kinda go like a little like that. Nose, nostrils be in the front, and then the spines on the head would be kinda going like that. That'd be the jaw, other arm. So, mine was kinda shaped a little more like that. Like, she was fat, like, she'd be like that thick in the body, but she was also, you know, quite a bit longer. Um, so but I distinctly remember at times where, like, my iguana's favorite treat was mandarin orange bits. Um, and I remember a few times where we'd put them in the dish and she'd, like, eat a bunch of them, but there'd be, like, 3 of them left in the dish, and she'd be looking at the dish so sad because you could tell she's like, "I want those treats," but she couldn't stop. She had eaten her foot fill, and she couldn't eat anymore, so she just, like, put her chin on the edge of her food dish and was, like, eyeballing them, like, waiting to digest enough that she could eat these last one, you know? It was kind of funny, but, so iguanas tend to, like, they'll get chubby, but they won't get, like, fat, like, I think they're not able to really eat more than they can process, but they do get, fat deposits, like, female iguanas in particular will get really fat thighs, um, but it's still within reason, you know? Um, and my vet, every time I took my iguana in, he used to say, "Ah, she's a perfect specimen." You know? So, she was, very well taken care of, but they do get chubby, you know? But they have limits, whereas I think mammals can I it's probably like an evolution thing too, I guess, because, iguana evolves in the jungle and they eat leaves and fruit, so, like, there's always kind of food around. Whereas, like, mammals, I think more of us are kind of, evolved for, like, a feast and famine type of thing. So, therefore, we store a lot more fat than, relatively speaking, than, like, reptiles do. So, of course, that's just my guess. I'm kinda talking out of my butt, but, it did seem to be that, even if she wanted to, she couldn't really eat more than she could, stomach, so to speak. Um, Whereas mammals definitely can, and I say this from experience, I definitely have more food than I need stored in stored in my belly and my butt. Um, so whereas reptiles, I think they have a certain amount of, fat stores, and then that's it. They don't, really get beyond that point. Um, so let's see here. I'm gonna add a little bit of shadow with, this. Excuse me. So then this illustration would be something like I would have like a section that's like meet the cast, and the first thing would be Zamo, of course, because Zamo's the main character. So there would be a description of Zamo, and I would obviously reference the whole bit about eating the neighbor's roses, etc. Because that's what Zamo appears to be contemplating. Now, for the purposes of the cartoon, I definitely made Zamo fatter than Zamo would actually be able to be in reality. We die in a living room. Are we died or are we alive? I don't know. I mean, kind of. I mean, technically speaking, we're definitely dead, but we are obviously in the living room. So I guess we would be in violation of the tenets of the living room by virtue of the fact that we were no longer living. Even though I've got shading on the rose and whatnot, I'm not going to put shading on Zamo for the reason I stated earlier that Zamo is normally just done as a line drawing. So, and I'm not going to worry about other background because realistically, this would be cut out. So the text may even kind of come down into, depending on how I decide to do the typesetting, which uh, I obviously have not gotten that far yet. Right, now we're going to draw Georgie, Zamo's pet human. Bring that up a little bit so we've got the whole thing showing. I guess I'll bring that back a little bit towards me so I can have Zamo still there without being in the shadow of this is my laptop up here that's on a little stand thing. So, now Georgie's story is she is an artist, a painter. So I guess kind of loosely quasi based on me, the version of me at that time, but also decidedly not based on me. Um, Certainly, I mean, I've painted off and on since I was a teenager, but the concept with Georgie is that she's actually a full-time fine art painter, like abstract painter. I am definitely not. Um, and then Zamo likes to torment her by asking her how many houses she's painted lately, i.e., pretending that Georgie works in construction, not in the fine arts, but um, that's kind of more for the purposes of deliberately aggravating Georgie. Um, and Georgie, during the main run of the comic, Georgie's boyfriend was this guy named Wilhelm who is a poet but also worked as an editor at a publishing company. In the 8-page reboot that never was that I've been inking the last few weeks, it's revealed that Georgie and Wilhelm broke up but stayed friends. And then over the course of the podcasts, Georgie eventually finds a new guy. Um, so kind of leave it at that for now. Um, but Zamo is always trying to get Georgie to move to Los Angeles, marry an American, etc., because Zamo wanted to live where it's always sunny and supposedly never rains, that sort of thing. And Georgie always refused. So, and also particularly annoying for Zamo. Zamo likes unsupervised alone time, but Georgie didn't go to like a studio to paint. She had made her own studio in the family room or in the rec room downstairs in her house, much to Zamo's consternation, because it meant that Georgie never left the house, or at least never left often enough for Zamo. Zamo wanted more unsupervised alone time to get up to no good. So, actually, what I haven't done on in any of these comics, I think the first one has Zamo wrecking things, trying to think of a good nickname to use, um, which is when Georgie says, "How about Zamo the Destroyer?" And then that becomes the name. Um, but there was actually an origin story, which I'm not going to. I don't know. I'll think about it. Your cat wants to go play. Yep. Um, but I might do an origin story. Short comic. I'd have to sit down and write it, but the gist of it is Georgie goes and buys an iguana from a pet store, and then the iguana starts yelling at her, uh, and Georgie thinks she's crazy for a while, and but then slowly other people can hear the iguana talking too, and she realizes she's not crazy, but now she has this obnoxious little iguana running her life, uh, and hilarity ensues, I guess, would be the stereotypical line from that point on. And so I might do that kind of like a intro of how they met, etc. But we'll see. Mhm. I guess we don't really see any of the other legs of the table. Although, no, we wouldn't actually. I guess for there. Um, Georgie does these very large scale, um, either splatter paintings or kind of swirling paintings. I think in one comic it was sort of said she's trying to capture the essence of movement or something along those lines. Zamo is not a fan of Georgie's artwork and thinks that Georgie should dedicate herself to doing paintings and portraits of Zamo instead, but that is not Georgie's thing. Trying to think of how the feet on my easel go. Probably not the way I've actually drawn them here, but whatever. You know, see if I think the Zamo part is kind of dry enough because what I'm going to do is kind of mask off. The reason being that one of the things Zamo often comments about in the podcast and also in the comic is that Georgie just um, splatters paint on the canvas. So I want to decide which. I'll do that with the bigger, um, kind of shaking. I will also put in some other lines, but we have a little bit of splatter going on. Oops, some of it landed on the easel, but you know what? If you have an easel that you're painting on for more than about, I don't know, the first hour or so, you probably have paint on the actual easel. So there. Now, some of that we're going to leave, and some of it we're going to smear for accuracy point reasons. That's probably good enough. Let me think about that. Uh, yeah, I think I'm going to leave her painting at that point. Um, And again, this is one that's going to be kind of uh, cut out so the text can maybe flow around. We'll see. I may also just kind of leave it as a floating thing and just have the text on top. So that went pretty fast, actually. We're a little bit shorter than I normally do. I normally stream for about 2 hours, 2 hours 15. But that is kind of what I've got prepped for today because I wasn't sure if this was going to take a lot longer. So let's kind of have a review of what we've done today. So the first was the what I'm calling the coda of the comic book. So this is going to be the the last comic in the comic book. So we'll have like we'll have basically you'll open it up from the front to the back. You'll have like, well, like your copyright page and that kind of stuff. That's kind of standard. Front matter is what they call it. I will write an intro explaining about the comic because after all, it has been kind of defunct for a long time. Um, but I'll talk about the inspiration, all that. Then we're going to have kind of like an introduction as written by Zamo. And some of this stuff I have from that book design class I did way back when, because I still have the PDF of the document and all that. And then we're going to have like an intro of the characters. And there may be some bonus material as well, because I think I had like the bit about Zamo being an anthropologist. I think I had a joke that Zamo was planning to open her own anthropological museum, the Zamo Anthropological Museum organization or something like, like the Zamo by Zamo. Um, and I had like a little drawing that I did. I'd have to find the original because I'm sure whatever scan I have it at is like way too tiny for print now. But whereas like supposed to be museum cases and they've got tiny bits of lint, like pocket lint in there, and Zalmo having written the paper about how humans carry amulets of lint balls to appease the angry dryer god who steals their socks. Like it was like purposefully absurd, kind of spoofing some of the stuff that anthropologists say. Margaret Mead, for those of you who know about that story, where anyways, yeah, like, and again, I was an anthropology major at one point. There's a lot of absolute BS in that field. There's a lot of absolute BS in a lot of the social sciences and in many other fields too. But, anyway, so there'll be some sort of bonus material kind of little extra bits. There'll be a meet the cast thing, which is what we started on at the end. So I'm going to have illustrations I have to make for those over the next few weeks on stream. And then we're going to get into boom, the comics. So I believe for Zomo there's 138. There also, I think there was a dozen or so, couple dozen that I did in French when I was taking some French language lessons. My French is probably terrible. I think what I'll do with that, I have a friend who was fluent in French. She doesn't use it as much the last few years, but I think I'm going to send her scans and just sort of say like, "Hey, did I screw anything up grammatically or whatnot?" So I might have a little um, section that would be Zamo en français and have a like next to it the translation so you know what's being said for anyone who doesn't read French. And then we're going to have that coda that I've been working on the last 4 Zalmo streams on Wednesdays. That was supposed to be the reboot in 2013 that then didn't happen, right? And then this is going to be at the end, the 2026 update. Well, as it turned out, the lazy monkey was very lazy because the last page of that 8-page reboot had Zamo saying, I don't know how often the lazy monkey who draws the comic is going to draw the comic. So then it's kind of like, well, update, it never got drawn at all. And then it explains that Zamo went on to do a podcast. And then, boom, in our next Zamo the Destroyer book, we'll start with some of the stories from the podcast era. Stay tuned. So, letting people know there's going to be a book with these stories. So we carry on that way. And then I'll have at the back, I'll have like an about the author page. Um, I'll probably have a page plugging my other comics like Noah's Archipelago and Ricky B. the Rock and Roll Rat and links and stuff. And boom, that's the book. Right. So yeah, the next few weeks, anyways, we will be working on bonus cartoons for this book. When we have completed all of that, then we'll start on the illustrations for these podcasts. But yeah, so thank you for watching. If you made it this far, thank you for your patience. Thanks for the folks who popped into the chat. It's always great to have someone to talk to during the show, and loads of fun talking about pets and all that. And yeah, we'll catch you on the next stream. Tomorrow night, I'm working on Noah's Archipelago, and Friday, God willing, I hope. I've missed a couple weeks worth of Ricky B. the Rock and Roll Rat Friday streams. One because I had an event that I had to go to, and then last week I ate something that really didn't agree with me, and I was sick. And anyways, you don't need to know the details. I wish I didn't, but I missed that stream. So I want to get back to working on Ricky B. Goes to Sea on Friday nights, and then we'll be back on Monday for Miles Morrow's Pursuit of Happiness, and then next Tuesday the Noah's Archipelago 2027 calendar. Sorry I missed last night's Noah stream. I had a call from a family member, and it just we had that conversation. I wasn't, so I couldn't do the stream, but we're back on schedule now. So again, thank you for watching, and bye for now, and bye bye Zamo. We'll see you again real soon. Bye.